Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Brianna, and let's talk about the ending of Leigh Whannell's Wolfman. So the Wolfman is a legend that will never die, so we were beyond excited to see a new rendition of the story by Leigh Whannell, who also directed 2020's Invisible Man. And wow, his interpretation of the Wolfman brings so much emotion to the story. He crafted a modern-day fairy tale about trauma, illness, and grief. It's like a hairy gut punch, but with a surprisingly hopeful ending, so let's get into it. The very first shots of the Wolfman cement the fairy tale style of this film. We get these grand, sweeping shots of Oregon that look straight out of the forests of Grimm's fairy tales. And when the woods open to the Levels farmhouse, it calls to mind a cottage from Hansel and Gretel or Snow White. But the movie is very quick to balance this fairy tale look and feel with modern reality. While it looks plucked straight from a picture book, the loud generator brings us back to reality, implicitly saying this is a fairy tale, but not one from way back when. This is a fairy tale about all of us.
I wanted something audiences could relate to more. Even though it is a bit of a rural setting, I wanted audiences to just instantly see themselves in the movie.
But the Wolfman legend isn't a specific fairy tale in the same way as Little Red Riding Hood or The Little Mermaid. There's no definitive story. We don't have a Grimm's fairy tale to reference. Instead, werewolf mythos is a mix of multiple folk tales and legends that amalgamated into our modern version of the monster. The point is, this story didn't have to be told in such a fairy tale style. It was a very intentional choice by director Leigh Whannell. See, fairy tales are actually very important to our culture and who we are as a society. Professor and fairy tale scholar Nancy Canepa of Dartmouth says, storytelling has always been a way to process, reflect upon, and react to the human condition, and the fairy tale is among the oldest and most enduring forms of storytelling. The fairy tales we hear as children give us a way to make sense of our life, not just of the good parts, but of the bad parts. We learn about bad people. We learn about death. If we're lucky, we experience our first tragedies through fairy tales. And fairy tales are purposely vague so everyone can relate to them. Usually, with just some minor cultural tweaks here and there, they are universal stories. Whannell filming this as a fairy tale asserts that this isn't just a story about the Wolfman. It's a story about human experiences that we can all relate to and will all have to face at one point or another. Whannell also uses a lot of fairy tale-esque foreshadowing and symbolism throughout the film. For example, the last name, Level, literally means baby wolf. And the name Blake has two meanings, light and dark, foreshadowing that he develops a dual nature as a werewolf and a human. His transformation is also foreshadowed in the lipstick scene with his daughter, and even this pool ball keychain. The orange ball is numbered 5, and in numerology, number 5 represents major change. Now, it's not subtle, but again, fairy tales rarely are.
You said fairy tales are all about universal experiences. Just kind of seems like this is just about him changing into a wolf. Arr.
Well, hold on, there's definitely more to it, but the wolf stuff is important. I mean, that's how we get cool transformations like this. The central theme of Wolfman can be summed up by this line. Sometimes parents try so hard to protect their children that they become the thing that scars them. Now that's best exemplified in the relationship between Blake and his father, Grady. In an interview with Sci-Fi, Grady's actor, Sam Yeager, said, Grady's way of showing love to his son is giving him the tools to live on his own. In Grady's mind, it is, I will die, and whether I love you or not, we're both going to be gone. So these are the tools that you need to live, and that is the most important thing I can give you. He did everything to protect him. But in reality, it pushed Blake away because he was always scared of him. The real tragedy is that, just like his father, he unintentionally scarred his own daughter. Blake clearly does not want to be his father. When he gets mad at Ginger, he backtracks and says, I'm not that guy. But he still led his daughter into a dangerous situation. And why did he take the family back to Oregon? Because he was scared. When Blake and Charlotte get into a fight, Ginger says, if I have kids, I'm never going to fight in front of them. And the next day, he tells Charlotte that he's worried about their marriage. That's when he suggests that they go to Oregon together, saying it will be good for them, and specifically, it'll be good for Ginger. He's trying to protect her from fighting parents and family strife, but in doing so, he takes her to a very dangerous place.
But he didn't know.
Well, he kind of did. He had an up-close and personal encounter with something when he was a kid, and at the very least, he knew there was very dangerous wildlife, and he says he lived there until he was 18, which means that he knew it was bad to be out after dark. Yet, he arrives with his family moments before sundown. There's a reason he apologizes to Ginger and says, I put you in a scary situation and I was supposed to protect you. You can also view Grady infecting Blake as a physical manifestation of the childhood trauma. When they fight as wolves, Grady attacks Blake in a startlingly human way. There's one specific moment where Blake is crouching on the floor and Grady slaps him. There's nothing animalistic about it. It genuinely just feels like a father slapping his kid. And later, Grady physically holds Blake down, a physical representation of how he subdued him as a child. Through that lens, Blake stopped the cycle. He worked diligently to avoid becoming his father, but once he realized he was too late, he just ended it altogether. Now, this familial makes complete sense for the Wolfman legend. In modern versions of the Wolfman legend, the Wolfman represents the dark side of people, the quote-unquote darkness inside of us all.
It's a technical expression for something very simple: the good and evil in every man's soul. In this case, evil takes the shape of an animal.
But early versions of the myth often dealt with father and son. One of the earliest versions comes from Greek mythology. The king of Arcadia, Lycaon, didn't believe Zeus was all-knowing. So, as a test, he killed his own son and served him on Zeus's altar. Now, of course, Zeus knew, and as punishment, he turned him into a wolf. And in Norse mythology, we first hear of a werewolf in the Volsunga saga. In that story, a father and son magically turn into wolves to go on a rampage together. They hunt together until the father accidentally attacks and almost kills his child. There's always been these familial and specifically felicital undertones to werewolf stories, and Whannell geniusly taps into that in this film. The other theme Whannell's Wolfman explores is grief. The Wolfman transformation is really shown through the lens of an illness. In many ways, it's more like a zombie movie than it is a typical werewolf film. Blake doesn't just transform on a full moon. The infection is something that he can't come back from. He is doomed from the first bite, and it's tragic. As fantastical as werewolves are, Whannell's version of the Wolfman is rooted in the reality of degenerative and terminal diseases.
I had one friend in particular who was suffering from an illness that was like a degenerative illness. All my emotions around that I was putting into the script, and there's no getting around the sadness of that.
There are so many diseases that eat away at both your mind and your body. The horror isn't just from the werewolves, it comes from Blake losing himself to a disease that he can't control. And the way Whannell shows Blake's perspective is amazing. The first signs of Blake's internal transformation is actually this slightly warped lens. It's not glaringly obvious, but subconsciously it makes us feel like something is just a bit off. Something is just slightly out of place, which is exactly how Blake feels. He isn't lost to the disease yet, but he knows that something isn't right. As he transforms further, he sees everything in this bright blue, which is brilliant. Dogs and wolves actually see primarily in the colors yellow and blue.
Wait a minute, there's more colors than yellow and blue?
I'm sorry you found out this way, buddy. Wolves also have fantastic night vision, and of course, at night, most things are cast in blue. During the POV changes, it's clear that he views the house much more brightly than Charlotte and Ginger. So Blake's vision is a very heightened, saturated version of wolf vision. Wolves also have binocular vision, which basically means that they have a lot better peripheral vision, and that's why we have this inverted fisheye lens. Blake is seeing far more than his human counterparts. Now, while Blake doesn't know that he's turning into a wolfman, he knows that something is very wrong. With some of his last mental faculties, he tells his wife that he's dying, but ultimately he's forced to go through this experience completely alone, both mentally and physically. He loses the ability to understand and communicate with his family very early. He's literally trapped in his own head.
I can't understand you.
And then he completes the physical transformation alone so he doesn't put his family at risk. Director Leigh Whannell said that the script was partially influenced by the turmoil of the last few years, including COVID.
Themes of isolation and dread and anxiety were naturally coming out in the script.
And for me, his isolation reminded me of how many people died in hospitals all alone during that period. That was a collective fear. We knew that if we got sick, that we could very well have to deal with it alone. But it also really plays on our fear of our own genetics. We can view the werewolf bite as a physical manifestation of how Grady traumatized his son, but it is also a disease, and so many diseases have a genetic predisposition. Charlotte says, "Your grandpa was sick, and I think he gave it to your dad." Now, if we view it through that lens, it's even more terrifying because it's so real. We are all genetically predisposed to something. Even if it's not a terminal illness, nobody's family is completely healthy. We all have some genetic predisposition that we just have to live with and hope that it never amounts to anything. Facing that reality is scarier than any werewolf. Now, I mentioned earlier that this movie is framed like a fairy tale, and fairy tales are universal stories. We're never going to experience a werewolf, but one day we'll all experience illness and disease. We'll all have to go through that. Now, whether it's us or somebody we love is up to fate. Now, because of the split POV, we see how scary it is for Blake, but we also experience the heartbreak that Charlotte is experiencing. Just like Blake is aware that he's slipping away, Charlotte is aware that he's dying. She is dealing with all of that grief. Julia Garner, who plays Charlotte, said in an interview with Sci-Fi, "When Whannell and I started prepping, I told him that I wanted it to feel that the audience was going through the 7 stages of grief in one night. When Blake is going through the physical stages, Charlotte is going through the mental ones. The 7 stages of grief are shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, and acceptance. acceptance, and she displays these very clearly. She deals with the shock when she first realizes he's changing. We actually see this from his perspective. He doesn't know why no one is talking to him or responding to him. She goes through denial when she refuses to acknowledge that he's changing or dying, as he says. She bargains when she tries the radio for help. She goes through depression when she cries after he subdued Grady. She goes through anger as he chases them. She tests him when he comes into the deer blind. And when she shoots him, she reaches the final stage, acceptance. There's so many layers to this. From a psychological perspective, this is the biggest tragedy in the movie. Blake accidentally enacted the same cycle as his father.
Yeah, but he couldn't help turn it into the Wolfman.
Exactly, and that is why it is a true tragedy. In classic Greek tragedies, the main characters don't ever mean to bring about these terrible events. In fact, oftentimes they're trying to stop them, but it's always their actions that inevitably bring about their own demise. Blake wanted nothing more than to protect Charlotte. Instead, he put her in the exact same position that he endured as a child. It's a metaphor for the trauma that parents pass on to their children, even unintentionally. However, his death brings a certain amount of peace both to him and his family. Ginger says he wants this to be over. After long and difficult illnesses, it isn't uncommon for people to want their pain to end. It's one of the reasons we have medical euthanasia, specifically so terminally ill patients don't suffer. And as hard as it is to lose a loved one, there is relief in knowing that they're no longer in pain. The final shot of the film is Charlotte and Ginger standing in this beautiful valley that Blake described as making you feel like everything is going to be all right. It is a terribly bittersweet moment. They've just lost so much, but as Blake's words suggest, they will be all right. There is still sadness, there is still pain, but they've gone through the worst of it. They went through the stages of grief, and now they can move forward. The Wolfman legend endures because we are all scared of what's inside of us, both physically and mentally. We all have anger and fear lurking inside of us that can make us lash out, and we can all be infected or develop a sickness that could just change our lives or even kill us. The fear that we will turn into someone unrecognizable is fundamentally human. Whannell plays with that fear masterfully while ultimately leaving the audience on a hopeful note. We can't always control whether or not we change. Sometimes fate just deals us a bad or unfair hand, but somehow, one way or another, things will be all right. And guys, that's everything that we caught in The Wolfman. Big shout out to Brianna McLarty who wrote this video. You can find her social links below. So what did you guys think of the movie? Let us know in the comments, or you can @ me on Twitter or are free to join Discord server. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.